Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. I love you all. And remember to never trust atoms. They make up everything. Now then, you might be wondering why you decided to click on this unknown YouTuber, and I understand. I'm an avid watcher as well. So let me give you a reason. Perhaps it's for the funny jokes at the start of every single video on my channel, or perhaps it's because I'm one of the few, if not only, reviewers out there who can help you figure out if you need a game in 10 minutes or less. Don't believe me? Then stay tuned and find out. Alright, so today we're checking out a game just released on Steam called Heat Death Survival Train, a first-person survival game that takes place on a train. And despite the game's name, heat is not your enemy in this game, it's your savior. It's Frost that's the enemy here. Whoa ho ho, what a twist. Developed by MiAh game devs and published by Light On devs, released in early access and selling for $12. I hope I pronounced those right. So, what even is this game anyway? Well, apparently, according to the game's story, you start off woken up in some random lab all alone, hooked up to a bunch of wires. Progress forward until you find a few platforms calling themselves a train, and then head out into the frozen desert looking for survivors, loot, and a source of warmth. But mainly, you're just looking for loot. Okay, so let's go into the good and the bad, followed by my final thoughts, alright? Up first, as always, is the good. So the first thing I want to talk about is the graphics. For an early access title, I think the graphics look pretty decent. Now, they're not the best and clearly missing in some places. The lighting is poorly done, the shadows are poorly done, and it does lack in contrast. However, despite those, the game still looks more good than bad, so I mention it here in the positives. There are some actual decent developmental decisions that work here, and I only thought it looked ugly a couple of times. Going through the tunnel in the beginning looked ugly, and due to some lack of proper lighting physics and contrast, it made it hard to find my way around sometimes, but otherwise it looked fine everywhere else enough, I suppose. Next up is the price tag. Now, if I'm being honest, I find this game highly underpriced. I won't spoil my own video, but this game only selling for $12 with everything included here, I mean, come on, game devs, $15 at least, maybe even $20, because that's what I think this game is worth. I mean, I just played Fast Food Simulator the other day, which isn't nearly as large or in-depth as this game, and they're selling that for $15, and also it's early access. When this game is finished, I think it'd be a $30 or $40 game depending on what's added, but I'm getting off topic. Basically, I think this game is worth its asking price and then some, and seeing a price tag like this is actually super generous of the game devs. The next positive point I'd like to go over is the gameplay. Now, I've played a shit ton of survival games, and I've seen a whole lot of stuff, including other train-based survival games. Never thought I'd see the day where that was becoming its own genre. But anyway, I don't want to get off topic anymore, so let's move on. For the gameplay, it's fairly simple. You have a train. You can build and customize on your train. You have to take your train from small little outpost to train station to wreckage or whatever else you find, all in search of that glorious loot. Your suit, which protects you from the cold, uses energy, its own energy source, when building something or using your light source. So you're going to need batteries to keep you charged, and then you can recharge the batteries at train stations, blah 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 blah. But you also need food and water to keep your stamina and health up. During snowstorms, however, your suit doesn't have enough to keep you warm, and you need to take shelter somewhere. If your train doesn't have walls and a roof, then find some random building to bunker down in until the storm passes. Your train creates its own energy and uses its own energy based on how much you decide to use its engine, and you can do other stuff with it. You can unlock newer engine parts or newer things to accumulate power or build things that take up more power. So, you know, it's the constant balancing act that we've seen in other games like this. And then there's the combat. Now, for the combat, at least at time of recording, it's fairly simple with ample opportunity to become cooler. You add a gun to your train and it gets hooked up to the main power supply, which then you can take remote control over the gun and use the gun to shoot down these evil drones that fly around and might attack you, I guess. But as I was saying, the combat is kind of lackluster right now. I mean, it has high hopes for later development, but as of right now, it's just not very fun. The building mechanics for the game are typical for survival games like this, and they work fairly well. Speaking of working fairly well, let's go into the next positive point, the stability. So the game was actually fairly stable. In fact, now that I think about it, I'm not sure I really noticed anything wrong with the stability. There were no glitches or bugs or frame rate drops or clipping or disappearing resources or crashing or anything really. Honestly, it worked really well and played really smooth despite being in early access, and I always like to make special mention of this, especially with early access games, because, you know, it's such a big problem with them. So it runs well, or at least it did for me. And a special mention in the positives, and the last positive point I have, is the creativity and the idea. Dealing with hunger, dealing with cold, dealing with the evil drones, a big mystery of what's going on, an interesting gameplay idea, and overall I think the originality and just the idea of this game was really well thought out, so I wanted to make special mention of it. However, that's all I got for the positives, and now I gotta move on to the negatives. But before that, consider this. If you join my Royal Guard, then you get bragging rights in the comments, number 1. Number 2, you can also tell yourself or tell others that you're part of a Royal Guard. You don't need to mention which Royal Guard, where, or how, but you can say it. Now, how do you join my Royal Guard? All you gotta do is hit that subscribe button. Also, I think it'd be a good idea to hit that bell, too. See, I review random games at very random times, and you never know when I'm going to review the game that you've been missing out on your whole life. So hit that bell and stay informed, alright? I'm just trying to help. Alright then, now we gotta move on to the negatives. So the first negative is the sound design. Now, let me start off by saying it's not the worst I've ever heard, but it's still pretty bad. The sound effects themselves seem to be decent enough, and the game does have some ambiance, but a lot of time there was just nothing but silence. There's no music, and even the ambiance kind of comes and goes. And with the sound effects being as quiet as they are, and even being as decent as they are, it's just not enough to cover the rest of the negatives involving the sound design, so it definitely needs some work. Next up for the negative points is the user interface. I hate it. I don't like it at all. It's confusing. It's awkward. It makes even controlling the game and your character odd, but we'll go into that next. I don't like the menus. They don't really make sense, and it just overall makes the building and inventory management aspect much more annoying and confusing than they have any right to be. In particular, I hate the building menu and I hate the inventory menu. I hope they change these because they're not only ugly, but they're also inefficient. And last but not least for the negatives is the controls and the flow of the game. Now to some, this could be a deal breaker, which is why it's important. First, the controls. They're fine for the most part, but they are a bit awkward and do need some updating. For instance, you can transfer all items either into or out of your inventory, which is nice and appreciated, but you can't sort your items, which is annoying and makes it harder to find certain things that you need. The organization is also pretty awkward, and if you have a stack of batteries in your storage box, but you need to pull them all out because you need to go charge them or something, then you have to manually click each of them into your inventory. There's no way to just grab and move the whole stack. So the inventory management controls are definitely a bit annoying and need some work. Then you've got the flow of the game. Due to random terrain, I think, your character will just periodically slow down for no reason. The sprinting function is just a bit wonky, as is jumping. Basically, to make a long story short, the control and flow of movement and inventory just need to be updated to be more user-friendly. As of right now, it's more than a little annoying actually playing the game because of these issues. So those need to get fixed ASAP. Alright, so that's all I could think of to say negatively about the game, and to be fair, the game is in early access, so there's bound to be some kinks in the design. My biggest complaint with early access games is just the overall state of them, like are they playable, is it interesting? And that's the kind of stuff that I look for in an early access release. And to be honest, I actually recommend this game. I think it's a good investment. The devs clearly know what they're doing, there's clearly something special here, and it looks like this game could end up being something super fun and addictive later on. I do wish it had co-op because I love playing games like this with my wife, and who knows, maybe one day. But overall, I think if you were interested in this game even a little bit, then it's worth taking the chance. I mean, it's a super affordable price, it's got a good idea and good enough of a gameplay loop to keep you invested and interested. It's mysterious, it draws you in, and it's not broken. So in terms of an early access game, I think it's a pretty safe investment and would encourage you to support talented devs like this, as well as invest in a game like this before it gets too big for its britches and charges an arm and a leg after it's done. Alright everyone? Alright, so that's all the time I got for this video. Thanks so much for watching, with a special thanks to those of you who stuck around to the end. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you all again on my next adventure. So until then, I bid you all farewell.